Ranking Member Davis mentioned something that's very important in my district, a company called John Deere. And one of the things you can find if you go to the Smithsonian Institute is the Waterloo Boy tractor, which was originally started by the Freilich Tractor Company, the first gasoline-powered tractor in the country in Freilich, Iowa, which is also in my district. So thank you very much for giving me that opening. There are 4 John Deere production facilities in my hometown of Waterloo, Iowa. They've got a big industrial equipment manufacturing facility in Dubuque, Iowa, which is also in my district, and their world headquarters is in Moline, right across the district from Davenport, Iowa. Dr. Tiller, one of the things that you mentioned was this the need for progressive research models to deal with the feedstock diversity that we see across the country. And what I'd like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is elaborate a little bit on what you meant by that, because I think one of the things we're looking for is education and training programs that are uniform in some applications, but also are flexible enough to deal with the diversity of feedstocks we are going to be seeing, especially in the emerging cellulosic ethanol industry and other bioenergy production facilities.
Sure. I think that that we are going to see tremendous change over the next few years, and probably what we envision today is not going to be anywhere close to what things look like in 10 years. So that I think they're continually evolving, and it's important that we recognize that. They are also very specific to those local resources. But one example that I think points out some of the challenges is the experience we've had over the last few years with some pilot production trials for switchgrass as a dedicated energy crop. To begin with, the farmers who were planting it called our extension agents a few days after planting to ask exactly what they were looking for, and the response was, "Well, look for something in a row." The point is we really know so little about a lot of these feedstocks right now. So we are starting from the ground level. We need to not only, I think we start from the place where we are, which is using the existing equipment and infrastructure and knowledge base we have, but we have a long ways to go to optimize that and to refine those processes and the management and the harvesting, the transportation, storage, logistics, all of the various aspects that go into turning something from a crop into a feedstock. We have a long ways to go to wind up with a very efficient system. And it's important, too, I think, to note that right now the models for the cellulosic ethanol biorefineries, about half of their costs are tied up in getting the feedstock to the plant and ready to use.
Dr. South, one of the things I'm very proud of is that I graduated from Iowa State University, the birthplace of the digital computer, and also home as a graduate student to George Washington Carver. And one of the things that George Washington Carver taught us was that there are endless opportunities to derive benefits from plants. And having grown up in a state where my parents both grew up on farms in Iowa during the Depression, my family's been farming and teaching in Iowa for over 100 years, one of the things that is always a huge part of the agricultural experience is a very strong sense of stewardship. And when I look at some of the research that's taking place around the country, including at Iowa State, and looking at a diverse variety of feedstocks even outside this country that could be used to try to reduce not just America's dependence on petroleum-based fuels, but the world's dependence on petroleum-based fuels. One of the things I'm interested in is how we take some of the education and experience in this bioenergy industry and transfer it across the world to developing countries who are under the oppressive hold of petroleum-based energy producers and are being kept back in their own economic development. And I'm interested if you have any thoughts on how we can move to that level as well.
I think the key to moving to that level is the establishment of the industry. There is just so much latent demand. We have interest from all over the world talking to us about how do we develop this industry in our country. And the challenge is, even in a developed country like the US, where there's a lot of incentive, a lot of market pull for this material, we need to put in place those things that will bootstrap the cellulosic ethanol industry to meet some of our own goals. Because the proof of concept of this industry will be when we've got multiple biorefineries running 7x24 and producing cost-effective ethanol. When that happens, not understating the ease at which it can be done, but the pull that's coming from those countries that you're talking about is already there. The research is the investment, it's already waiting to happen. The biomass growth areas of the world through the equatorial regions are the areas that are ideally suited for biomass ethanol, and they're ideally suited to be cost effective in doing so, and they have a real need. The issues are going to be again around the types of things that Kelly was talking about, that there is from one end to the other of this value chain a need to move it up a step to take it into a commercial application, and it needs to be fostered in a way that we can get through its transition period into that commercial application.
Thank you. Mr. Rastetter, one of the things that all of us on the Small Business Committee are very interested in is the impact on Main Street of the decisions that we make here in Congress. And what I'd like you to do, if you would be willing to, is share some of your observations about how ethanol producers in Iowa and around the country have had an impact on Main Street merchants, stores, and the communities that you serve.
You know, one of the interesting aspects of it is just all the facets that it impacts. And to Congressman Davis's earlier question about people teaming with FFA, the Renewable Fuels Association has started funding significant curriculum development with the FFA group to hit all the facets that you think about. And if you think about the impact of biofuels, it impacts agronomy and stewardship of the soil and research and having to do with the amount of stover that you can take off of eventually, so that we're prepared for cellulosic ethanol, to biotech genetics on corn, to precision farming on GPS from John Deere, to local dealers that, from a transportation standpoint, of instead of a market where we ship it over corn overseas and a unit train creates a couple of jobs, we have hundreds of new jobs created in logistics and management of that, whether it be from actual truck drivers to the education aspect, to communities like Fairbank, Iowa, where we spend $110 million in a community of 400 people, that on a per capita basis would be unheard of, that for the next generations to come, that plant will be producing some form of energy. And it may not be exactly what we have today, but it'll transverse and continue to develop, to education, to people having interests. The comments that we've hired a half a dozen engineers that range from working in Oman to South America that have come back to Iowa, that graduated from Iowa State, to farm kids who got jobs around the country. From local businesses and all the infrastructure created in the turnover, to corn farmers who now have land values that have increased over 20%, because they don't need government subsidies to survive when they have a price that is reflective of the value, to now an infrastructure investment that will continue to increase yields and the technology and starch levels of corn that allow us to extract more ethanol from that corn, to livestock producers that are now doing research and substituting distillers grain for corn and soybean meal that they previously had fed. So it's really hard to describe in detail all the facets of it, but within that there are just literally hundreds of jobs created when you think about a plant our size that eats 39 million bushel of corn and then sends a third of that back to livestock feed, ships the rest to add to fuel, and the rest of the ensuing benefit to the economy that happens.
The state of Iowa and Ohio are sometimes confused by people on the East Coast and the West Coast, but the state of Ohio has a great combination of rural parts of the state, great educational institutions, and a great manufacturing history. So I'm very pleased to yield to the ranking member of the full committee, Steve Chabot, and would ask him to share his comments or questions with our panel at this time.